Greetings. This is the Sunday school lesson for October 9th, 2011, and depending on what Sunday school lesson book you use, the title will be Subversive Wisdom or the Superiority of Wisdom. And the lesson comes to us from Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 13 through 18. And again, this is a lesson from the International Sunday School Lesson Series. I want to begin with verses 13 through 15 because Solomon, who the book of Ecclesiastes is attributed to, gives us a very interesting example story, a very interesting parable about the power of wisdom and how wisdom can appear. And beginning in that 13th verse, I also, and I'm reading from the New International Version, I also saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man, poor but wise, and he saved the city with his wisdom. But nobody remembered that poor man. A couple of things to highlight in this story of wisdom. First of all, that Solomon did not receive this wisdom from a great lightning bolt from the hand of God. He did not observe this wisdom through some dream or the angels teleporting him to some far distant land. Solomon saw this wisdom under the sun. In other words, he saw this wisdom in his everyday coming and going, nothing special, nothing spiritually unique, nothing religiously profound. He just saw it on his normal everyday business. And let's keep in mind that we can see examples of wisdom beyond church. Granted, I pretty much appreciate people coming to church, quite obviously, but even among people who are just going about their daily lives, you're going shopping, you're going to work, you're doing whatever it is you do, you can see wisdom right there in front of you. You don't need an extra boost from the Holy Spirit to see wisdom. Just pay attention. All you have to do is pay attention, and you'll find wisdom staring you right there in your face. And this was an example of wisdom that greatly impressed Solomon. And please keep in mind, this is a man who had received wisdom directly from God. So if he's greatly impressed by this thing of wisdom that he had just seen, if he can be greatly impressed by this wisdom, then that means that no matter how wise we are, how smart we are, how wise or smart we think we are, that means there's always something new for us to learn. There's always something new for us to accept and to hold on to and to learn from. So yeah, Solomon, wise man, but still finds something that adds to his wisdom. And this is the story that he's impressed with. That there's a small city, and we're not talking about a large metropolitan area. We're talking about, maybe 1,000 or so people, maybe less. We're not talking about one of the major powers such as Jerusalem, Damascus, Memphis, or any of those great ancient cities. We're talking about, in fact, the city isn't even named, so it really can't be that important. And that there's a powerful king that came against it. The king surrounded the city, built huge siege works. For those of you who are pretty much familiar with my part of the country, Eastern Virginia, maybe you've seen the siege works around Petersburg, Virginia, or the siege works around Yorktown, Virginia, where you have these large bunkers with cannons surrounding them. And it's a very interesting thing to see if you are a history buff. But once when a king or an army decides that they're going to lay siege to your town, and they're going to use these large weapons to break down the walls or break down the barriers of your town and completely encircle and cut you off so that you can't get any supplies in or send out for more troops to come in to help you. Once when you're in a siege or besieged, chances are you're going to pretty much lose the battle. You're pretty much going to lose the war. That's what happened to the Confederates at Petersburg. That's what happened to the British at Yorktown. And that seems like the likely end to this story. But yet, in this story, we find that there is a man who is poor but wise. And wisdom is not always given to the wealthy and the most powerful. A lot of times wisdom is given to people who are overlooked, people who are on the margins, people who everybody else turns their nose up at. To give an example, and I don't encourage people being strung out on alcohol or drugs, but sometimes, and I used to have a friend and we used to joke about this, you notice that winos have a habit of sharing their last sip with their buddy, knowing that sooner or later they're going to need somebody to give them a last sip. Now, a wino can have that kind of wisdom, but yet you have people who make far more significant amounts of money and who are far more respected in their communities and won't even shake hands with each other. So wisdom, we serve a God that will give wisdom to almost anybody. You know, ask and you'll receive, seek and you'll find, knock and the door will be open to you. So there's a poor man, but he's a wise man. He's not somebody of great stature or great wealth, but he knows how to communicate in a way to get people thinking, to get people to see a better path and a better alternative. And by some means or some reason or another, the story doesn't tell us, but he winds up saving the city. I don't know, perhaps he goes behind enemy lines and explains to the king how useless it would be for him to take this city. Perhaps he develops some sort of means where the people can extract all the food and water that they need in order to survive the siege. We don't know, but whatever it is, despite the odds, this powerful king versus this small city and this poor but wise man saves the city. Wisdom can overcome great odds and great obstacles. And sometimes the wisdom comes to us in forms that are lowly and despised. And it's that wisdom that can even save a city. But despite the poor man's wisdom, nobody remembered the poor man. I guess it's kind of the excuse that some of the prosperity preachers use for what they do, because of course prosperity preachers, we see them dressed in the nice suits, we see them driving the fine cars, living in the big mansions, and they'll tell you, not only will they tell you, but their followers will tell you, nobody follows a poor man. That's why my pastor, that's why my prophet, that's why my bishop got to look rich, because people don't follow poor folk. And well, maybe that's where that mentality comes from. Now here it is, this poor man's wisdom saved this small city from this powerful king, but yet the poor man gets no credit for what he has done. He gets no respect for his wisdom. Maybe they remembered the wisdom, but as far as the guy that showed the wisdom, nobody cares. Nobody pays him any attention. But that's the example story of wisdom. And of course, the conclusion to that example story, verse 16, we draw the conclusion of this. Two things that we can conclude. Wisdom is better than strength. Now again, this is a powerful king with a powerful army, who builds these powerful siege works, who builds these powerful weapons for the siege. And yet, despite all of this, all it takes is for one poor but wise man to overcome the king, to save the city. Now, of course, we talk about the need for, and I guess it's a man thing, you know, we want men to be wealthy. We want men to be strong and assertive and tough, macho. But thing is, you can be wealthy, you can be strong, you can be assertive and macho and the whole 9 yards. But all it takes is for some 98-pound weakling looking guy to speak words of wisdom to make that what we would call role model man look silly. So always seek to obtain wisdom. Always seek to obtain understanding. Granted, there is nothing wrong with making do for yourself. You know, I tell my church all the time, look, if God blesses you to afford nice stuff, have some nice stuff and thank God for it. If the Lord provides you with a sound and strong body, and you know, you're an athlete, a football player, basketball player, whatever, thank God for the gift that you have. Not everybody has that. But without wisdom, wealth can be lost. Without wisdom, health can be lost. So wisdom is better than strength. Be it economic strength, be it physical strength, be it strength in your role in society. None of that matters as much as wisdom. But this is the second conclusion. But the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. For some strange reason, we tend to pay attention to celebrity. We tend to pay attention to what we would call, or who we would call, sophisticated. In fact, that word sophisticated, sophist, is ancient Greek sophist, Sophia, wise, wisdom. And we equate wisdom with wealth or with luxury. And not everybody who lives in wealth and luxury is necessarily wise. And yet people who are poor, people who are living on the margins of society, we tend not to care about them. We tend not to accept their words and accept what they have to say and what they have to teach. I guess a couple of classic examples of this. Number one would be Mohandas Gandhi, who lived after World War II, or probably just before World War II, as a holy man. This guy, and keep in mind, Gandhi was once, if I'm not mistaken, a lawyer. You know, this guy had education, had relative wealth, but yet his final years, the man pretty much wore very simple clothing, ate a very simple diet. He was poor. And he led a great movement to liberate India. But of course, as India was being liberated, Gandhi wanted a nation of all cultures. He wanted a nation of all religions. Hindu and Islam were the predominant religions. There was also some native Christianity in India. But Gandhi did not want the nation separated based on religions. And of course it was. Nobody paid him any attention. Another key example would be that of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And here it is. Today we have all of these ministers constantly talking about wealth and talking about getting rich and how God wants to bless you with earthly wealth and earthly riches. I have heard it said of Martin Luther King Jr. that if a thief broke into King's house, they would have to break in and put money in the house the first night, and then the second night go back and steal what they put in, because other than that, King was broke. A lot of that man's money went into the movement. He didn't have a Bentley. He didn't have his own private jet. But yet and still, you know, I think we got a Martin Luther King Jr. monument now. But how many preachers are living like King lived? Living a simple life, living a life dedicated to serving people. Yeah, a poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. And that's the conclusion that we have from this example story. And that's a conclusion that we can see in our lives today. So we have an example of story of wisdom. We have the conclusion of wisdom. But verses 17 and 18, we can see how wisdom can be ruined. How wisdom can be ruined. First of all, that quiet words of the wise are no more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. And you know, a lot of times the wisest words aren't loud. The wisest people are not very forceful or very belligerent. But yet, the people that we listen to most often are the loudest, the most bombastic, the most controversy generating people. And unfortunately, we can look at politics here in America. You know, there are people who are both Democrats and Republicans who see value, who stand on their points of view, but also see value in the other side's point of view. And they have a tendency to try to work together, try to meet on common issues and find common ground and work from there. But that's not what we listen to. We listen to the loud liberals on MSNBC. We listen to the loud conservatives on Fox, and they have their shouting matches, and they get the highest ratings, the highest TV ratings. You know, Rachel Maddow on one side and Bill O'Reilly on the other side. We love the loud stuff. We tend to ignore quiet wisdom. So that's one way that wisdom gets ruined. It gets ruined where we tend to heed shouts of the rulers of fools rather than the quiet words of the wise. And then finally, wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And don't get me wrong, I have relatives who proudly serve this nation, and I've had relatives that have proudly served this nation dating back to the Civil War. So for the sake of national defense, yes, war unfortunately is called for. But what good is a weapon of war in a time of peace? You know, the longer that a bullet sits there unused, that's a cost. That bullet has to be used in order to make a profit, in order to turn a profit, because once that bullet is used, guess what? You have to buy another one. Whereas wisdom can be used in wartime, it can be used in times of peace. Wisdom keeps its value. You speak that word of wisdom, you can repeat it as often as you wish. And if somebody else catches that word of wisdom, they can take it into themselves and share it with others. Wisdom is a gift that keeps on giving. A bullet, once when that bullet is shot, guess what? It's used up. So yes, wisdom is better than weapons of war. And it only takes one sinner to destroy much good. And the AIDS crisis in the African American community, this is an excellent example. Whereas you can have a group of virgins and a group of people who don't have sex much, or they might do it with their boyfriend, their girlfriend, whatever. And, you know, everybody in this area happens to be clean. They don't have any diseases. But all it takes is that one person who is HIV positive to lie in bed with somebody. And then somebody else lies in bed with that somebody who laid with that person who was HIV positive. And the next thing you know, what used to be an area where everybody was pretty much clean, now all of a sudden you have the grounds for an epidemic. It only takes one. It doesn't take 100. It only takes one. And it only takes that one corrupt minister who's teaching false doctrine to mislead so many people. So let us be careful about who we let in our lives and who we let in our hearts and minds, and the words that they place into our hearts and minds. Let us be careful about listening to the quiet voice of wisdom. And after all, what was it? The prophet, I think it must have been the prophet Elijah, who was on the mountain. And even though there was a great earthquake, even though there was a great sound of thunder, even though there was a great fire, he listened to that soft, still voice, and that was the voice of God, not all the loud stuff. God can speak loudly, but a lot of times it's a quiet voice that is the wisest. So that's what we have for our Sunday school lesson for Sunday, October 9th, 2011, valuing true wisdom, subversive wisdom, or the superiority of wisdom. And this comes to us from Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 13 through 18. There is the wisdom example story, there is the conclusion of wisdom, and then there is how wisdom can be ruined. And I pray that you all would have a very, very good day of worship on Sunday, and that the Lord will bless you in many ways.